Good afternoon, good morning, depending where you are located. After the next normal, quite successful event last week, we are moving forward with our webinar series. And today we have a very intriguing topic, which is digital asset management in localization process and how to leverage the process and how to do it better. I'm really pleased to welcome originally 5 great experts, unfortunately 4 because Charlotte had to excuse for herself. And let's start from left to the right. So first of all, we have Emma Put, Head of EU Medical Capabilities at Amgen. Hi Emma, how are you?
Good, thank you.
We have Morten Sorensen from Vacation. Hi Morten, how are you? Of course, from Novo Nordisk.
Hi Dario.
Nancy Hechnel from Encyclopedia. Hi Nancy, how are you?
Hi Dario, hi everyone.
And Mladen Stojak, also from Encyclopedia. Hi Mladen, same question to you. How are you? Okay, so let's kick off this interesting webinar. And during our preparation call, we did and prepared, of course, different question sets, which we would like to discuss today. And let's kick off the stage and ask definitely maybe the most crucial question when we speak about modular content or content localization. And this is how to properly feed the hungry content machine. And let's start first with the lady. So I suggest maybe you, Emma, can maybe first take the stage. So kindly, Emma, the stage is yours.
Thanks very much, Dario, and thanks for the invitation to join this question today. So it's key that content is certainly king, and data also is a part of that. And I think, you know, as we look to how we can drive the approach to better serve the needs of the healthcare professionals and the stakeholders that we're trying to reach, a large part of it is the data asset management, because you need to centralize and make it accessible to more, and to be able to leverage that and kind of almost repurpose it as you need, and as you better understand the people that you're trying to serve and how they want to receive the information, whether they're, you know, very engaged with infographics, but they're not very interested in reviewing lots of slides. So as we learn more about the people we're trying to interact with, you know, the easy place to begin is that central piece, which is the sort of asset management, taking almost a centralized approach and bringing in the content that you're producing on a kind of global level or a regional level is one part, but also enabling countries and other groups to be able to share that information in and have it available more broadly, and so that they can review and pull from it and as needed adapt according to local regulations, requirements, etc. But increasing that pool for everybody makes it more digestible. And then I think the other part is you know, also looking to have standard templates available, because that means that the information can easily be repurposed. It's, you know, maybe not the way we've always operated, and we've tended to have the engagement on a local level or engagement on a regional level, and we've had multiple different partners in that. But I think we have to look at the way that our business model works in order to be able to serve this kind of hungry audience and manage it more digitally. I pause there.
Thank you very much, Emma. Very nice insights. Nancy, same question for you. I think you can really build in a proper way based on the Emma's foundations.
Yeah, and first of all, thank you, Dario, for bringing this topic on stage. It's crucial, but it's not yet really on the topics, on the conversations where it should be. So, and I can't agree more with you, Emma. Very well explained. And I mean, we know that COVID-19 really has pushed any company, any sector, size of company, countries to rethink the way you engage with your customers and communities, and that is communication is a big part of it. And of course, with the increasing globalization, this is now the era where nearly everything has gone from offline to online. Every company is busy with digital transformation, with specifically the pharmaceutical and the medical industry, with digitizing the contents, and that is the ramp for becoming global, increasing the global footprint. And I'm really happy to see that that now localization, translation, content is, as you say, king, as it has been before, but it is really not a cost factor anymore. It's a business driver.
Thank you, Nancy. Morten, let's hear your answer. I know that you're a huge fan of this particular team, so definitely very keen to hear your reply on that.
Thanks a lot, Dario. So first of all, I agree very much with the ladies around this topic and some of the important areas we need to look into, because there's no doubt that we are in a new reality. COVID has accelerated that, but even if we take COVID out of the equation and we just think about multi-channel or omni-channel or whatever we call it, and the need to feed that hungry machine that we call omni-channel. Just imagine that in the good old days, as that some might say, we had the field force and we created content for the field force. We went to congresses, we created content for that, but now we maybe have 10 more channels that we need to deliver content for. And that's not only expensive. If we also just take the old processes with us, it's also very, very time consuming. And if we just, our assumption is that we at least will see our content need grow 3 times. That might even be quite conservative, really, but we have to start somewhere. But does that also mean that our budgets will grow 3 times, or our resource allocation will grow 3 times? And I'm pretty sure the answer is no. So we also know that we need to think differently, and some of the things that we have been very focused on when it comes to easier localization processes going into this world is that we not only optimize individual steps of our content supply chain, but actually rethink and integrate the content supply chain. And I think we'll talk about some of our goals later on, so I'll wait with that. But as Emma described, I think some of the core components of the work that we do is, of course, our single source of truth. The fact that we need a strong digital asset management that has aligned global, regional, local tagging and transparency throughout with proper tracking of our content. But we also focus quite a lot on making it easier to create assets without the use of local agencies. So we invest quite heavily in a tool that we call EasyBrief, which is basically a browser-based one-stop entrance to create any type of digital asset that can be reusing global content in a modular way, but it could also be that I create new content based on our Lego blocks of different designs. Emma, I also think you alluded to that. And then there's a final thing a couple of things we also focus quite a lot on MLR processes. We'll come back to that later on. How do we get around the complexity of the MLR review? Because if we can't get the content easy and fast out there, it doesn't really matter because no one is gonna use all these channels because they don't have time. And then, of course, the insight around it. I think we'll also talk about that later, but that's maybe the most critical element for us. Because I said we're going to grow 3 times in content. Maybe we don't have to do that if we actually know what works. But historically, that has not been the case for us, and that had to change. And that has been some of the things we've focused a lot on, creating that transparency and insight on the content use, but also impact with the end customer.
Thank you, Morten. Mladen?
Hi. I will try to connect with the previous introduction from my colleagues, and as Emma mentioned, repurposing, and as Morten mentioned that the amount of content tripled, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the budgets will triple as well. So there are some solutions for those issues, and I will try to give just a brief introduction from the perspective of a language company, a language solution provider, which has its own view, since we are dealing with on a daily basis with huge amount of content and all those things related to pandemics and the digital transformation which we are facing during the last year have a huge impact on our daily businesses, and we are forced in somehow to tackle with the things we didn't do before, and those growing demands influenced our daily operations in a large scale. I would try to focus on the technology part and what technology is able to offer in combination, of course, with the professional human knowledge in order to deal with that growing demand for a localization and the digital content in general. But I believe that we will have a time and the chance to discuss them during the further conversation, during our further conversation.
Thank you. Next question, and let's start this time with you, Morten. And this is, what are the key pillars of content localization process? How do you see it coming from a global team working across many cultures, countries, etc.? So how do you see the proper steps and the key pillars speaking about the content localization process?
So one of the things that struck us quite a bit when we started on this journey was actually just something as foundational as visibility to content. First of all, could anyone answer me whether markets used global content and how they used it, and then if you look the other way around, could they actually find it, that content? That has been one of the first epiphanies that we had starting on this journey. One of the other things that we also think is crucial here is the ease of reuse, that you break down the barriers of taking a global piece of content. I think an anecdote that I hear over and over again, if you don't do anything about this, and I've seen throughout my career, is that you take a global piece of content. You might have a digital asset management platform, or at least a place to download a campaign, but then you take all the source files and you completely disassemble them, and then you use your local agency to start all over again, creating the same campaign within a frame of market fit. But I believe you can achieve market fit in much more efficient ways, because it's not about suggesting that we shouldn't tailor to market context, but it is about breaking down barriers to get the content easier out there. And we have 4 focus areas that when we build our end-to-end content supply chain, we have to be able to answer one of the 4 focus areas. And one is transparency in use and reuse. So the fact that we can actually see what content is used, what is the percentage of the content that is used, but also how is it reused across channels, and how is it reused across markets. And this is not about being policemen, because that's the first thing some people react to. It is really more as a strategic guidance also to where do I put my investments, whether I'm a global team or whether I'm a local team. The transparency for working smarter. Really, it's not about policing. It's not about is the goal 90% reuse or is it 60%. We also have quite a lot of focus on insourcing of our content production, and we're not doing that necessarily because we believe we are better all the time, but we do it because we believe and we can see that taking more ownership of the asset production secures that we get the right tagging in place of our content, and that we produce for the right standards. And it makes us a lot more efficient at one hand, but it also ensures that we start to generate the data that we want for one of our other focus areas, that is insight. And insight to us is not the use and reuse I talked about before. It is actually that I can see how a key message performed out with different target customers in the markets. So we use the data that we generate in our content supply chain to put into our 360 customer view. So imagine that in a market where you're using one key, for instance, as an identifier, we can actually connect the impact with that ID, and that helps us tremendously. Not because we will ever tailor content one-to-one, I think, in our industry, but when you start to look at certain types of customers, that you're not using only secondary research, but you actually use your own primary research of actual behavior. to help inform that. And then the final area that we focus a lot on also is the agility component of this. And there are two things I think we will deal with later when we talk about compliance. But that is modular content as an enabler for agility, but also lean medical, legal, regulatory review processes. So those are the areas that are important to us.
Thank you, Morten. Just for my curiosity, did those KPIs changed during COVID? And in which particular field have they increased, decreased?
No, I would say they have matured, because they started out as something that was maybe more important to us, because we had the vision of what we thought we could believe. But with COVID accelerating, suddenly that future we always talked about, because I always talked about, your content will grow this much, and no one really understood why we needed to do our integrated content supply chain, because guys, I don't see any change in how I behave. That has switched significantly after COVID.
I'm asking because last week during Next Normal we had a very interesting comment, which was that the role of the medical rep changed a lot, but the KPIs didn't. So, which is of course.
But I think it's because we decided on our KPIs for the future when we started on it, and not based on the past, because the biggest challenge we've had is when we start building an end-to-end content supply chain, you have to start somewhere. We started with a centralized digital asset management. Everyone can say yes to that, no problem. Integrated with your approval process, all fine. But the centralizing the content production was a challenge, because everyone wants to work with the local agency. And the real value for centralizing the content production is not necessarily the costs, even if you can do that cheaper. It is the insight. But the insight comes much later, because you need to build the infrastructure to allow that insight to be produced. And that has probably been the biggest challenge we have. And if I have to put a recommendation out there to you guys on this webinar, I think the keyword for me and for my team has been persistency. Don't give up. Just fight it, because you're going to have a lot of people who sees the idea on the right levels, but with the people actually producing the content, it can seem very far away if you don't get the immediate value.
Thank you, Morten. Mladen, speaking from a solution vendor side, what do you see are the key pillars?
Yeah, this was very interesting what Morten said, because from the solution provider point of view, we are facing the same challenges. Sometimes we don't have the same worldview as you do as a buyer of solution or services, but issues or challenges are the same. We are also trying to be transparent in all our efforts in order to deliver as much quality product or service as it can be. We are trying to boost our productivity, to boost efficiency in order to be as effective as possible. And yes, we have to be persistent, because when it comes to digital asset management in general, it's all about the data. I like one saying which says that algorithms are around us. We all know that, and the data is the oil that fuels the engine. And if we want that engine to be efficient, and if we want to get most out of it, we have to put data that needs to be collected in a well manner. They have to be sorted, cleaned, managed, and maintained properly. So when we fulfill all those requirements, then we can expect that we can get most out of any effort, whether it is a technology, whether it is a solution, service, however we call it.
Thank you, Mladen. Except that we go on electric power these days, right? Okay. Emma?
Thanks. Yeah, so really interesting comments. I took quite a few notes. I think, yeah, to address that whole change management piece and people's perception of why you're doing something, it's a huge problem. And, you know, even when you show people the path and how it's going to make their lives better and how it will benefit everybody, it's really been quite challenging. And I think probably it's also related to the COVID reality too, because you want to cling on to the things that you still have control over and that you can still influence and you can still do yourselves and you still own. And so to give part of that up, it's harder right now. I think it's really challenging to get that shift in mindset and why we want to, again, also change more when everything else has changed in life. Why can't we just have some consistency? So it is that kind of strategic guidance in changing the mindset is critical in this. I think it was interesting, as you were saying as well, about, you know, yes, the digital asset management often linked to the approval system, and that's great, and a lot of companies have already kind of centralized that approach. But how that flows to the MSLs or everything is often, or how it's available and visible to other people in the organization is often changeable. And then that parent-child association. So even when some content has come from a global sort of resource, and then it's adopted or adapted at a local level, the connections within systems are not necessarily there to show the pull-through. And you also have to think about how you train your teams to kind of be consistent in that. And again, why it's important for us on a kind of global level or above to understand and to be able to, yes, see where we're investing. And it's not about, you know, is my content effective, but it's also about, you know, is the content, you know, kind of valuable for the external people. So, you know, we need to try and explain it that it's not, like you said, policing. It's more that, are we bringing value? Are we investing in the right areas? And you know, is there something that's really of interest that maybe we need to do more of? So it's been interesting. I also like the comments about the kind of the MSL changed, the role has changed, but the kind of the KPIs haven't, and absolutely. And it's the same with everything in digital right now, and the same with the Next Normal webinar last week. I wasn't able to join it all live, but you know, being able to catch up and consume that information when I have time. And that's what we need to do. Is it's not always we you know, we're so used to measuring our success in the now and having the people there and present when we want them to be, but actually we have a far greater opportunity to reach more people with our information if we can have that digital asset management available in a more on-demand and self-service approach. So I think, you know, also it's part of not over-engineering and not trying to push everything, but enabling in a compliant way the pull now. Also kind of speaking to how the kind of metrics get pulled up, it's often challenging with, you can pull from your digital asset management system or an approval system into your CRM, and you can maybe show it through a media library approach. It doesn't always work, and it doesn't, again, always give you those sort of aggregated analytics that you want, because you can't pull through, again, the parent-child elements. And, you know, we have to look at how we can, in other ways, identify all of the ways that the content created is used, and in all of the different sources, whether it's in a medical event, whether it's in a medical engagement on a one-to-one and so on, or on a website. So that's, I think, also becoming more critical. I like the comment also about the tailoring content one-to-one, because I think it's right. But I think we will get to the place where we'll be able to be in a appropriate way, like taking the influence from Amazon or from Netflix and so on, where I understand, you know, maybe I'm engaged on something and I'm consenting to be there, but I understand, you know, and the algorithms or the you know, you're able to understand what the person is interested in, the type of content, what they're looking for. And then it's, you know, how can you prepare their view to kind of, you know, based on kind of several principles, but how can you give them what they're looking for? So I don't think we'll be, yes, definitely doing tailored one-to-one, but I think we will get further in that kind of customer experience feel.
Thank you, Emma. Very interesting insights, definitely. Nancy?
I can really relate to what you said now, Emma. You really picked up a couple of points and you connected the dots. And let me just add maybe two more things from the perspective of the solution provider, of the language service provider that makes it all global. You said at the beginning something about the content has tripled, Morten. What does that in localization mean? There are companies that localize into 25 languages, into 45 languages, into 80 language and dialects worldwide to have this global footprint and to be able to communicate with their communities, customers, people, employees. And I just really want to bring this up because that's also my personal mission after 20 years in localization of content. All the efforts, and as you said, Emma, the study and the research, and is this a content of value for my target market or my audience? All this study that goes into the source text and source contents. Just keep in mind when it's about making content multilingual and global, that effort also is effort to translate and to localize, because the localization of content is not only converting something from A to B. We are all tech-enabled, we are all AI-powered today. There's always a human component that makes the little tweak so important, and that creates the real value that makes the people connect to what is written or said there. And the concept of being global first as a product company or a service company makes it a bit easier for us as a service provider. When you take up localization up to the strategic level at the earlier stage, at quite an early stage, you can really foresee and avoid a lot of hiccups in terms of time, maybe time issues for registering a product, maybe in terms of cost. When you take this topic on a strategic level up from at the beginning, so this is then really great cooperation for a great multilingual result. And the other aspect that you also already brought it up and you touched it, Emma, as well, the ecosystem approach is so important, because content, as you said, is being created in several systems. It's so fragmented. We don't have real standards, or there's not a real one standard for content submission and content the content journey. So we are dealing with different source systems where the content is being created, and in translation localization we also have a number of systems to make it all happen. And the ecosystem approach to match these systems, to connect them, to integrate, saves a lot of time, nerves, issues, and that is bringing it together, breaking down content silos. And I've seen it last week as well at next Pharma conference, that it's a big topic for the industry, breaking down the content silos, making it digital. Just to mention that maybe as the last thing regarding to your question about the key pillars in localization, Dario. Digital transformation is such a buzzword. Making data digital is for us really daily bread, because we can only localize properly in efficient processes what is available in a digital way. Of course, we can work with images, just now making it really concrete for everyone who's following now and listening. We can localize any kind of content and formats and media, all channels, everything. But it makes it much more efficient when we receive digital data, when we are connected to digital data instead of PDFs, high numbers of PDFs, which are not accessible directly, or images that contain a lot of non-accessible content. That is all part of the ecosystem approach from the beginning of the product development.
Morten, you have a comment?
Yeah, no, or maybe a question, because I'm curious to understand when you say putting content translation at a strategic level, what you actually mean by that. Yeah, because you can probably hear from my presentation that the translation component is probably the one that actually is the smallest in how we look at the localization process. And the reason why is not because translation is not important, but it is actually because of that human component that you talked about. We haven't had success in centralizing localization as a part of our integrated content supply chain. So we do have some integration with providers where you can do more automated translation as a part of your localization process, but I have yet to see a native speaker in a local market being super happy about that part of the process. That being said, we also have a challenge, and maybe it's not a challenge, but it's at least the reality that it's very, very rare that that content gets localized one-to-one or even close to one-to-one. At least we operate quite decentral there. So the governance around that, I think we have more focus on ensuring that if we can make it easier to take the content from global, the likelihood, and we can see that, but the likelihood is that that you will use it then compared to in the past. So that's where we've started. So back to my question, the strategic level, enlighten me. I'm curious.
I really like your question, because it is putting at the center of the attention the challenge of the whole industry in regarding centralization. It's a challenge, but localization will always contain a delocalized, a local element, because a good translator, professional translator in regulatory for a specific market knows the local rules, the local terminology. So it is, as we all know, this well-known quote: "Think global, act local." So in localization, with maybe centralization of processes and tools, yes, but parts of the service will always be decentralized or local, let's say. And by accepting this, but making it a bit more agile, the cooperation with local partners has to become much more agile. And the second part that you mentioned is a service question. You were referring to translating one by one. How is the tone of voice actually brought over? How do you make sure that you have one global brand integrity, let's say, but local language? This is the art of language solutions. And language solution is actually not only translation. There is a lot more. There are many affinities and thin lines between the services. And I see you nodding that. And maybe before you might add a couple of examples. It's transpiration, for example. Think of transpiration, Morten, as a service. It's really uplifting translation. It is being more creative. It allows for more freedom for the translator to bring the message from one language to the other. But when it's a bit more commercial, when it's about different countries where, like in Germany, you have a lot of formality still, while I know in Denmark and in the Netherlands, people are far less formal. This is the granularity that sometimes you can reflect only in the variety. So it's not only about translation, no? And it's also about localization. Localization means that you adapt contents when it's agreed, when it's the scope of the service. You adapt the contents to the local market, to the local legal setting, to the local audience, according to specific timelines. And we use also tools for that: translation memories, term bases, terminology databases, all kind of technology that supports the linguist to focus on what is really the human element of it. Does that answer your question?
I think so, but that's a longer conversation I can hear.
Yeah.
Just to add, I remember coming back to this content and localization flow. I remember a couple of years ago, maybe you remember as well, when Volkswagen in the United States,
Volkswagen.
now, exactly, they
right
changed the US market from Volkswagen to Volkswagen. I think a very nice twist of words. However, a couple of years ago, they had this slogan, Volkswagen das Auto, right, across whole Europe. but they didn't knew that on Swedish, I really don't know how was that possible, that on Swedish this is having an extremely bad meaning, right? I won't say what kind of meaning, explore it further, but I think this is this part to which Nancy referred, that localization might be the key, one of the key pillars when we speak about content localization, for sure.
And if I may add a little comment, because that was to Emma's comment around the parent-child relationship of global to local assets. We probably use the same vendor to handle our assets, I presume. And one of the headaches are that the make a copy is not a mandatory function when people use it. They can download the source files and then continue. The way we are trying to cope with it, and it's not 100% bulletproof as it is, but since almost 100% of our digital assets now is going through our internal content production unit, then we make sure that it's a requirement as a part of creating the local job in our digital asset management / approval system to create that parent-child relationship. And I know it's a lot of hand-holding, but it is to ensure that we actually show the value of reuse, and later on impacts. So we have to do it because it's not happening automatically. Because it's not a natural workflow for our people, and we just have to accept that. So if the vendor is listening in today, please take a look at it.
Like the parent-child relationship thing. Yeah, that's what
it gets really geeky now, I know, but
but the data is there. The data you mentioned, there's a lot of insights nowadays, and we as solution provider and service provider, we together then with the buyer, with you, we can create really valuable insights about reuse of content. I think we come to the KPIs later. That's related to that, but a lot has happened on that side, and the data insights.
But it can happen, and the platforms that most of us use actually support it. There is just a breaking point in the process where human behavior does not fit with the technical process, and since there is a loophole, that's where at least if you try to get that data out of your content supply chain, you have to be aware of that gap and figure out how to address it, and that's where we have simply gone the difficult way, if you could say so, and just reinforce it manually until there is that fix, because we believe the insight is so crucial.
Thank you. If no further comments, let's move to the next question, which is how to deal with compliance. We already spoke about that, but let's deepen the topic. To ensure a smooth and speedy localization process. Maybe constant unlocks the content, or is it? Who would like to start first? Let's start first with you, Mladen.
Yes, I had actually conversation with Nancy yesterday regarding all those questions and what we can say about certain topics, and this was one of the questions where we had a very interesting discussion because we as a solution provider, we are facing some challenges, specific challenges in terms of buying behavior sometimes, because it's not a rare case that buyers are treating us as a black box, and or they are using dump over the fence approach when it comes to localization or any other activities related to that type of services. And when we talked about that, I mentioned two things. When it comes to our side, the most important things are managing expectations, or how to manage expectations in terms of compliance. And the second most important thing for us is how to equip external partners for us with proper information and guidelines Morten mentioned insourcing in their case, and this is very interesting area, because we explored that area. In 3 years ago, we did a research among our customers, and we wanted to point out what are the most important things when it comes to our mutual cooperation. Nobody says that the price is the most important thing. Everybody emphasized quality. For example, in our case, quality, terminology, on-time delivery. Those three things were the most important for our buyers. In order to make that possible, it is necessary to emphasize that human part in the whole story. It is necessary to establish a certain level of cooperation. We call that hybrid model. It's not just a seller and buyer. It should be certain group of people on a buyer side responsible for a cooperation with the provider of services, in order to provide all necessary information, input, guidelines, etc. In those circumstances, we can expect the best possible outcome. That's how I, or we as a company, how we see things.
Thank you, Mladen. Emma?
Thank you. Yeah, no, I agree absolutely with what you're saying. And so for me, the compliance element, you have to build the solution with them in partnership. And, you know, if you work in an agile team, you know, consider if it's really critical, have them in your core team, or at least have them in sprint reviews, whatever you're designing and trying to build. And interesting from the service provider perspective, it's I would say, you know, certainly they should be aware of the compliance kind of frameworks and agreements and approach, but I think it's down to the company that's contracting with them to be responsible and to take that accountability. For me, it's, you know, whenever we are embarking on things, and certainly it's been a big part of the digital world, and you know, we've had guidance from FPR, etc., IFPMA on how to approach the digital engagement and digital content, and that's been good. But you know, as all the companies now are kind of putting their positions together as to how they approach it. And fundamentally, the kind of the principles haven't changed. It's just that we're having to do things a lot faster, and you know, create more content, as we've discussed. And I think, you know, to some level, people have got a little bit uncomfortable with the speed, and that they feel that they're more likely to make a mistake or make. So I think, you know, by bringing compliance in with you to partner with you on the journey, I think that's the best way. That's the best approach, because you know, if you take the approach that I'm going to build something, I'm very compliant, and I know, and I don't, you know, break the rules, and I'm aware of everything. But then you work on this, and then you have a review after the end of 6 weeks or whatever with somebody, and they say, well, actually, no, you know, you have to go back and start again. And so I think it's better to partner on the journey together, and you'll be able to move faster forwards together, rather than having to kind of, you know, always go back and check on these things.
Thank you, Emma. Morten, back to you.
So continuing on Emma's talk about partnership, I agree that's crucial, because I think we have to remember that not even compliance or medical or legal, they actually want to do this work. They do it because they have to, but it's on top of everything else they need to do. So I actually think everyone has a carrot here to figure out how do we make this better. And the two things that we have been working on, or either am working on right now, is our two components. One is lean MLR processes. So we introduced for global last year a new standard operating procedure that allows for full, light, and non-reviews of promotional and non-branded content. And I think the light review is the most interesting one in this case, because it actually allows it to be on the discretion of the content creator to decide whether this piece of content needs to go through a full MLR review or not. And what's really interesting here is not so much that we can now do it. That is something we can do because we now make a pragmatic decision and evaluation. Is this data new, for instance? Have we used it before? Because what we really want to avoid is not that we don't do a proper review of content anymore. Of course, we need to do that. But there are so many cases where we reuse content in different ways, where the context is different, where it's used in a slightly different way, and we keep using full resources on this every time. So it really allows for that. One of the issues is, do you then have people who wants to take that accountability and take the risk, you could say, of approving content without going through the entire review? Because what if I made a mistake? And that's where that's where the second component comes in, because we really believe that modular content and the reuse features of content will help us here, because our platforms that we use now enables us to when we go and reuse a piece of content, it helps us to understand what components of this content has been approved before, and it actually highlights it. So if I have changed a paragraph, it will show that this paragraph was changed, but all the rest is still the same. So even if I don't dare to do a light MLR review, the stakeholders that are doing this review now can focus on the things that changed and the context instead of everything, because they have the guarantee that this did not change. And the same goes for something that is really time consuming, references, annotations. The fact that you start to reuse them and you reuse the linkages to the content that you're creating, I mean, it's a massive time saver for the organization. So back to feeding the hungry machine, I really think there are some, or I know there are some huge wins here. But of course, it requires a lot of change management, because we've grown up in this industry to be not taking risks. And I don't think this is about taking any risks because the system will help you, but it's a new way of thinking. Yeah, it is okay what I'm doing, and of course that's difficult. But I do believe that we have a lot of technology now, and we start to see a lot of precedents in how we do things across the markets that will drive this change. But of course, it's not happening overnight.
Thank you, Morten. And Nancy?
Thank you, Dario. Yeah, I really like the link you created, Morten, between the reuse of content and compliance. It is directly linked to the way how we approach, for example, when we start a new corporation with a company where we are responsible for localizing the contents for 50 markets and being compliant. So we help our customers to be compliant in terms of language, and language makes sure that they are compliant in terms of regulations, product registrations, export, import. It's just, since you mentioned before Dario Volkswagen, it's just something that I remember from the localization industry years ago. It goes really back to the time when the translation asset management was not yet so professional and digital. And there was, I think it's 15 years ago, certainly, and there was this huge delivery of parts to China, which would not pass the I'm just missing the word, Duan, Zoll, what's the English word for the check at the border?
Customs. Customs.
It would not pass the custom. It was a huge disaster because the terminology of the specific parts was not compliant to the officially registered denomination of the part. So the delivery had to be shipped back to Germany and reshipped again. Yeah, it's an example from another industry, how terminology is part of being compliant. And how do we do that when we start a new corporation, for example, with a new customer? We've we don't just simply start by asking what's your system, where do you create the contents, where's the contents. We start the conversation far earlier and we prepare a data set. So localization today does not mean to reinvent the wheel. And now I'm trying to connect to you, Morten. We analyze data. We exactly know how consistent is the data that you have produced, let's say in English source language, that needs to be translated into 50 languages. We exactly analyze how repetitive is it, how technical is it, and we can create upfront data sets. We call it translation memories with previously translated contents or standards, so that we make sure that we are right from the beginning. And of course, we are talking here about localization asset management. These assets need to be maintained properly, specifically terminology, because it's so compliant relevant. And but this is technology, which makes it possible today to, how you say, more than to centralize the assets. Important, the base ground for any kind of content localization, but we need to work delocalized and to make it compliant.
Thank you, Nancy. And last question for today, and let's start this time with you, Emma, which is, I think, maybe the less important question, right? Because you speak about KPIs. So what are the major KPIs to measure content localization process? And did these KPIs change during COVID? Maybe we can ask addition to this particular question.
Yeah, so I think, yeah, the metrics are interesting in terms of the process as well, because you know, one thing that COVID really helped us to identify was that there were gaps in how we were managing our data. And I think we've spoken about having that central kind of digital asset management, which is often linked to the kind of approval of the material. But what we didn't have necessarily is all of that content in a kind of digital free way that could be then utilized in other ways. So as Morten's spoken about, like being able to kind of pull it into different formats and you know, being able to, with that modular concept of, you know, highlighting this hasn't actually changed in content, but instead of it being slides, it's now an infographic. And being able to take that, because that kind of didn't exist before. So how we've thought about the efficiency, and yes, going from that, you know, 27 different agencies that you like to work with, but thinking about it differently. So I think efficiency, but also future proofing. So it's you know, we've had to look at the processes and really, you know, consider, were they best approached. And I really like the kind of light and full MLR review, because I think it's an interesting concept. But I also think the service providers in helping partner on that and ensuring that systems are appropriately gated. So for some countries, you know, a content piece does have to be approved in the type that it's being released in. So even if it hasn't changed, it's not okay for some countries that you can just say, okay, it doesn't need approval because it's not changed, it's just changed the format. So I think there are really things that we've had to examine, is kind of the efficiency, and really drill down into understanding how is the content reused, because I think we started about this, but in the past, no one really bothered to pull the needle or the thread through. No one was really that interested in the digital kind of piece, because it was more about having the conversations. But as we've moved into this more digital world and everybody is interested, and you know, the role of the MSL has changed, and suddenly they're, you know, preparing a kind of engagement plan where they're looking about different channels, and it's all new. But so I think we've had to certainly do that, and we've had to look at, you know, move away from the kind of consumption of content exactly in the way we did before. Like this webinar would have been potentially a face-to-face, or Next Normal last week was face-to-face. And you have, you know, 300 people there, and you get so many questions, and it's wonderful. And then in reality, in the digital world, you know, maybe there aren't so many people live, but then afterwards you get 6,000 views, and you know, people connect more on LinkedIn, the conversation continues, and you form a greater kind of reach. So we have to absolutely look at things differently in the value. And certainly the other piece that is kind of changing as a result is connecting all of the ways that the digital asset is used, because it's certainly very fragmented still. And you know, we might have some things on a database, and it may not be linking exactly to the digital asset management tool. It may be uploaded separately. How do you capture all of that consumption and use as well? How do you have to bring in, you know, AI or something in order to understand all of the ways? So these are the kind of things that we're solving for now, and absolutely it continues to change, but in an exciting way.
Thank you, Emma. Very good points. Definitely. We are left with 4 minutes, which is like 1 point something minutes for each of you. So let's start then with you, Nancy. What are those major KPIs when you speak about content localization process?
I think it's a very triggering question, and I think it would be worth doing an add-on really related to this one. I found it interesting what you said, Emma. It really makes sense to me how you would measure, let's say, the result. And still, I would really like to emphasize now in my 1 minute, it is probably one of the most difficult things to measure, translation, because it is still subjective. Language can be artificial, but there's still a human or a subjective element, and this makes it not easy to measure. But maybe, yeah, one thing to add is it sometimes makes more sense to measure the impact of the overall experience instead of the translation product itself. So this can be done by A/B testing or local market engagement inquiries or research on product launch in different markets.
Thank you, Nancy. Morten?
Again, I would like to follow up on Emma's comments around the approval process, that it's not so much about dismissing the approval. It's great you can enable that, but for us it's also really about what is the approval that you do, because it might be that you have to do an approval, but if the platforms can help us eliminate most of the time we spend on an approval, that's a success. So if we look at some of our major KPIs, apart from costs, because I think as a global function we focus on cost, because when it's aggregated up to a global level, it's a lot of money. But at local level, it doesn't really matter. But what does matter is the time to market of all of this content. And we look at time to market in 2 areas. One is production, where we can bring it down significantly, but certainly also in the approval process. So one of the things that we did quite early on in the process was to establish a baseline, understanding where we're coming from, so we actually can measure it. And we do see, I mean, quite high improvements in terms of the time it takes to pull even a full MLR review, but especially the light MLR reviews throughout, from creation of the task to its actual approval end of the day and ready for distribution. I'll say those 2.
Thank you, Morten. And Mladen, final thoughts?
I would also like to follow up on something what Emma mentioned, and this is that actually principles haven't changed. And with that, I would like to conclude this conversation, since we are running out of time. Principles haven't changed, and when it comes to localization as a very work-intensive activity, one of the most important things I would say in general is the context. So knowing what is being localized, both in terms of the format and the themes, and whom, and for the whom is content is being localized, is the essential for the localization program success. This is also important when it comes to KPI measurement, because localization as an activity doesn't bring direct value. It is enable which which provides value to other business activities and enables them to be more successful than they will be without localization. And this is something I would like to say at the end of this conversation. We could continue for hours and hours in this tone, but I believe that I will stop here.
Okay, thank you very much. So Nancy, Emma, Morten, and Mladen, was really great pleasure. We will publish this webinar on our official YouTube channel, so make sure you subscribe. Happy upcoming holidays. Take some rest, and after that, let's keep engaged and take very good care. Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.